What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And we are coming to you after the All-Star break. It is time for us to get into the so-called second half of the season, even though there's only 28 games left to play in the 2024-2025 campaign. Obviously, 44-10 heading into their first matchup post All-Star break against the Brooklyn Nets. Chris has to pack and go to Brooklyn tomorrow. So we will try and keep this as brief as possible while getting into the nuances of the second half of the season. First things first, the Cavs have to make a move by Thursday to add a player to their roster to meet the 14 minimum players on the NBA roster. They are currently at 13. This could be done by a 10-day contract, a two-way player being elevated to a standard NBA contract, a buyout market acquisition, or simply grabbing a G League player and elevating him to an NBA standard contract. A couple players that we've talked about before that are on the two-way option, of course, Emoni Bates, Luke Travers, and JT Thor are the options for the Cavs to do that internally. Then you also look to the G League roster and who could potentially be brought up. The two main names that we've discussed on this podcast are Pete Nance and Nae'Qwan Tomlin. Pete Nance has just returned to the Cavs after a stint again with the Philadelphia 76ers. He's played 68 total minutes in the NBA this season, if that tells you anything about what he's been doing, bouncing back and forth between Cleveland and Philadelphia. But guys, when it comes to this need to fill the 14-man roster and also the opportunity to add a 15th player for the maximum, who do you think is the best option for the Cavs to do this? And obviously we understand that the Cavs have been known to give 10-day contracts at the end of the season to fill this void. And do you think that is the most viable option for the Cavs to not mess with any chemistry and camaraderie that they have going on internally more than they already have with the DeAndre Hunter trade?
I will say this in the nicest way that I can. It doesn't effing matter. It just doesn't. These guys aren't going to play. I mean, Luke Travers has been on a two-way all season long, and yeah, there have been times where he's been injured and he's been unavailable, but Emoni Bates isn't getting playing time. JT Thor isn't getting playing time. Luke Travers isn't getting playing time. Like, the only chance that somebody has of coming here and getting consistent playing time is if multiple injuries happen at one position and they're desperate to sign somebody off the street that has an NBA resume that can actually give consistent quality minutes, and there's a belief that that guy can give consistent quality minutes. The Boston Celtics signed Torrey Craig immediately after he was waived. That's somebody who could have come here and had some kind of role for the Cavs if there were a bunch of injuries at the same kind of position. If Javonte Green gets bought out by the New Orleans Pelicans, then that's somebody who, maybe in a situation, maybe in an unforeseen circumstance, he gets an opportunity to play some minutes. He gets an opportunity to be in the rotation. Part of the reason why Ben Simmons chose the Clippers instead of Cleveland is because he just didn't see a pathway to consistent playing time. Because he understood that the only way that he was going to get on the court is like for a couple of possessions on the defensive end of the floor. And there was just more opportunity waiting for him in Los Angeles. And if you're going to be bought out and you're trying to resurrect your career or you're headed toward free agency, you want an opportunity to play. Like, yes, you want a ring. Yes, you want to be a part of the playoffs. Yes, winning matters. But other stuff matters too. So, if the Cavs are looking at this situation and they're saying, hey, what are we going to do here with the 14th spot? Are we going to elevate somebody from the Cleveland Charge? Are we going to find a free agent that's out there already and give a 10-day to? Like, that tells you all you need to know about how the Cavs are approaching this position. and what they think of the roster that they currently have, and what agents around the NBA think of the roster that the Cavs currently have, and what opposing executives think of the roster that the Cavs currently have. This guy is going to be roster player number 14. And he is going to be buried at the end of the bench and will only get an opportunity on maybe Fan Appreciation Day when everybody else is deciding to take that one off, or if there are just a pile of injuries at one specific position. So, the Cavs today, according to my sources, are kicking around what they're doing with this spot. They're still trying to figure out the best approach for them moving forward. And that tells you all you need to know about the value of this.
Yeah, I'll be quick. You convert a two-way, you sign a G League guy to maintain roster flexibility, right? Then you see what the buyout market has for you. It's going to be a challenge because, as Chris said, you don't have much of a role to offer. Other teams with interesting rosters, hint, 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 the Los Angeles Lakers have those roles available to you. I mean, like, centers should be flocking there. They should be begging for buyouts, wings, all that stuff. And then if that player, whoever it ends up being, whether it's the two-way you converted or a 10-day contract that you gave or some free agent off the street or a buyout guy, if that player plays, you have problems on your hands.
Okay, on to the next topic. Basically looking at the Cavs injury list, even though they have not had an injury report for the game against Brooklyn. We're recording this on Tuesday, February 18th. But the one thing I do know is that Dean Wade was pictured heading on to the plane for the Cavs to go to the single game road trip for the Cavs against the Brooklyn Nets. I always take that as a good sign, especially because in this case, it's just a one game before a back-to-back against the New York Knicks on Friday night at home. Chris, have you heard any updates on Dean Wade, Isaac Okoro, and then again, Ty Jerome because of his calf injury that kind of sidelined him for the last game before the All-Star break?
We'll see on Ty, but I think he's okay. Everything that I gathered in Toronto shortly before the All-Star break is that it was very, very minor, and the Cavs were being extremely cautious, and because they knew that the All-Star break was coming and they had a week off, that it just made more sense to not even push it against that caliber team, especially. It is a good sign that Dean Wade is on this trip coming up because he hasn't been on a couple of these road trips recently for the Cavs. They just didn't seem like it was anything that he was going to play, and they just wanted him to stay back in Cleveland and continue rehab and continue on-court work and not waste his time. So, yeah, I think it's a positive sign that he's going to play. And I also reported a couple of days before the finale against the first half finale against Toronto is that Dean felt good. Dean felt like he was close to 100% and he was ready to go. And the Cavs told him no. The Cavs told him that they were not going to push it, that they wanted to give him extra time. And they wanted to keep him out through All-Star break. And that was the same kind of feeling that I got when it came to the availability of Isaac Okoro as well. But my sources tell me that Dean was ready to go and he was ready to play. And he was open to that idea. But the Cavs basically said, no. There's no reason. We've got the All-Star break coming up. So continue to get closer to 100%. Continue to get the work that you need to get in. So no setbacks when it comes to Dean. And I would expect him in the lineup against Brooklyn on Thursday.
Getting into something else that we wanted to touch on for this podcast is the lineups that could be used in the second half of the season. This is the more fun part of this portion of the podcast where we get to go into the depth chart a little bit and tinker with options that Kenny Atkinson has. And guys, as this podcast has been going on, I've been just looking at the depth chart and kind of jotting down my ideas throughout. Obviously, this is going to be leaving out some players, and I will get backlash on it from our listeners and subscribers. But here's the couple of lineups that I've put together, and let me
You're like
know
Kenny
what.
Atkinson right now with an Excel spreadsheet. I love
Hey
it.
man, mad scientist over here. DG, Don, Max, Evan, J. Obviously, that is the starting lineup that we can expect at least coming out of the break. Then you have Ty Jerome, Donovan Mitchell, DeAndre Hunter, and Evan Mobley. Darius Garland, Sam Merrill, Max Strus, Dean Wade, and Jared Allen. Darius Garland, DeAndre Hunter, Dean Wade, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen. Donovan Mitchell, Max Strus, Jalen Tyson, DeAndre Hunter, and Jared Allen. And I just, obviously, there's a whole lot more that we could go through. These are just the ones that I could picture in my mind being the most potent. And obviously, we don't know the status of Isaac Okoro as well. And also, how he returns his shooting form will be a big indicator on whether he gets a big chunk of his minutes back, because we know his offensive rating was through the roof to start the season because, in large part, of his three-point percentage shooting and how well he came out of the gate. That has then been altered a little bit since having his shoulder injury and being out for multiple weeks on multiple different occasions throughout the year. Jimmy, I wanted to get your thoughts on the lineups that you think could be the most dangerous, and if one stands out to you, or just how much fun you think mad scientist Kenny Atkinson with his gel or sweat hair or whatever you want to call it will have in his dark movie room going through the different film of all these different players.
You know where my allegiances lie. I want the wall of wingspan. I want Dean Wade, DeAndre Hunter, Jared Allen, and Evan Mobley to stand side by side on the court, extend their arms out, and see if they can make it across the entire court with their arms. And I want someone to try to throw a pass over the head, and I want whoever the fifth player is, probably Donovan or Darius, because someone's got to handle the ball, to play free safety behind them, and I want them to scatter around and try to catch those lob passes. Now, I don't know. I think that is a very interesting potential defensive lineup that you can deploy. I also, Ethan and I talked about this before the break. I want to see how Kenny goes about deploying Dean Wade and DeAndre Hunter next to Evan and J.A. It's cool to have an awesome rim protector on the court all the time. It's even cooler to have a stretch four with the defensive capabilities that those two guys have, one of those guys on the court at all time. And I will say, the DeAndre Hunter trade has progressed pretty smoothly to this point. The real test of it will be how it affects Dean and Isaac, in my opinion, because we've talked a lot before about their three-point shooting confidence, the roles. I mean, they've both been great so far to this point, but they've kind of had the ultimate green light. Now, here's a guy capable of playing anywhere from 25 to 35 minutes at your position every night, who puts a lot of extra pressure on you to deliver in that specific area because DeAndre Hunter is such an accomplished shooter. So before, it's like, okay, well, Isaac's not hitting tonight. We'll let him go through the motions, let him work through this slump. Now, particularly as we get closer to, figuring out more precise playoff rotations, it's like, okay, you're not making your shots tonight. DeAndre, get in there. You're going in early, or maybe we're giving DeAndre extended run the next time he goes in, what have you. I'm interested to see, as those guys work back, not only just regaining their rhythm and learning what it's like to be in an NBA game and regaining their confidence in the flow of a game, but like now there's someone who puts extra pressure on you if you're either of those guys.
I think there are two things that I'm going to be paying attention to the most, and I don't know how Kenny's going to answer it. It's always hard to predict how he's going to go about it. The first thing that I'm going to look for is, how much does Kenny feel like he played Dean and DeAndre together? Does he think that there's room for both of those guys? Because in many of those cases, it's just with one big. So it's going away from either Jared or Evan for whatever extended stretch that you want to go to that look. The other thing is, like, Kenny's big on combinations, and he has shown that throughout the course of this year. He likes Darius and Jared together, and it's been extremely effective for the Cavs. and he likes Donovan and Evan together. Does he like DeAndre better with one of those pairings more than the other? And which one is it? That's something that I'm going to watch for. The other thing that I'm going to watch for is how much more willing would he be to potentially go extended stretches with just one big? Because again, if there's one lineup that intrigues me a lot, and it's Evan at the 5, Dean or DeAndre at the 4, the other one at the 3, and then the 2 dynamic guards, the 2 all-stars in Darius and Donovan. But again, that requires going away from Jay. And Jarrett's been really, really good. And he's been even better closer, the closer that we got to All-Star. Like, he was making more of an impact. He was being more consistent with his production at both ends of the floor. So it's like, does Kenny feel like he can go longer stretches without those 2 guys together because he's not missing the size? You know what I'm saying? Like, DeAndre's different than Isaac. DeAndre's different than Max. DeAndre's different than Karis LeVert. There's just more size available to him now, where maybe he doesn't feel like I'm missing out on that if I break up Jarrett and Evan for a long, extended stretch. So I think there are some fascinating subplots with this whole thing. But to me, like I said, the 5-man lineup that really, really intrigues me, and this is no disrespect to Jarrett, this is not diminishing his impact in any sort of way, but it really intrigues me to have Darius, Donovan, Dean, DeAndre, Evan. Like, that lineup, it feels like it has everything. You got the 5 shooters, 4 playmakers, basically in one lineup. You know, DeAndre can do a little bit with the ball in his hands. He can create for himself. He can create for others. You can post him up. You can post Evan up. It's just, I just think there are a lot of really interesting things that the Cavs could do with those 5. And I know that there are multiple people on the coaching staff that are really, really intrigued to see what that quintet looks like.
And I know, like, we've talked about Max Strus is a small forward. We've had to have this arguments with subtexters, listeners, viewers, reviewers, whatever you want to call them. Like, we have agreed that Max Strus can hold up as a small forward. But in these kinds of situations, he doesn't have to anymore. Like, obviously, if he starts as a small forward, he can come off the bench and be a shooting guard, and which we know is like more of a true position for him, guarding guys of that kind of size. Also being able to still spread the floor and get more looks, open looks, especially when you have guys like DeAndre, Dean Wade, and Evan Mobley, who now can spread the floor as well. The other thing that I want to mention when you bring up the combinations that Kenny Atkinson used, and I think I referenced this before the break, but the 5th most used 3-man lineup by Kenny Atkinson this season is Darius Garland, Dean Wade, and Jarrett Allen. Obviously, the pairings with the core 4 being split up are the top 4. Donovan Mitchell, Jarrett Allen, Evan Mobley, Jarrett Allen, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley. Donovan Mitchell, Jarrett Allen, Darius Garland is the most used at 741 minutes. But the 5th most is Jarrett Allen, Darius Garland, and Dean Wade at 514 minutes. And this is even including all of the games that Dean Wade has missed this season, which I think is notable as well. And we've talked about this at length on the podcast already. Kenny Atkinson simply likes Dean Wade alongside Jarrett Allen. And he's already utilized the combination of Darius and Jarrett throughout the majority of the season. So to see Dean Wade next to Jarrett, there leaves the opportunity for DeAndre Hunter to play alongside Evan Mobley and Donovan Mitchell in that combination. Obviously, we will have to continue to monitor if he sticks with that, because as you've seen already in the lineup matchup data, it can fluctuate, and depending on what the other team is doing and what other matchups are available, Kenny could particularly. I'm looking like Chris said. I want to see how much Kenny plays DeAndre and Dean together, because that's going to be a huge aspect of the comfortability of playing those two alongside each other. Now, do you feel like you can split their minutes, kind of how you do Jared and Evans? Like, is that how you have it matched up? I just think it's an interesting concept when you talk about the lineups that are available to all of them.
I think there are two things that are fascinating when it comes to Dean, because there were two perceived advantages that he had when it came to any conversation about his playing time or any conversation about his role. Number one, statistically, he was the most impactful wing defender that they had. Stats said that he was more impactful than Karras, Isaac, anybody else that you want to throw out there. And a lot of the eye test backed that up too. And it was clear that Kenny believed in him as a defender. And it was clear that teammates believed in him as a defender. So that was one advantage that he had. The other was he's just bigger than everybody else. So it's like when you wanted to play a super big lineup, then you use Dean as the 3. Like if you need to match up against the Celtics, you needed Dean Wade, right? If you were matching up against Oklahoma City, you needed Dean Wade. Like there were just certain opponents where you felt like you needed a player like that, more so than Isaac Okoro, more so than Karis LeVert, more so than Max Strus. Like, do you need Dean as much now that you have DeAndre? That's a question that I'm going to continue to ask myself. And I think that's a question that this organization is going to continue to ask because, you know, again, Dean has been really, really impactful, but he has been harder for this organization to count on when it has mattered the most, both from a physical standpoint and from a mental standpoint. If you don't have to count on Dean as much, like if his role isn't as prominent, is that a better thing? Is that a better place to be in as an organization? I would argue that it is. And this doesn't mean that he is removed from the rotation, and it doesn't mean that his skill set is no longer needed. It's just like the advantage that he always had was, well, he's the big wing. He's the supersized wing. He's different from that standpoint. Even if he's missing shots, even if he's not giving you that much offensively, he's different enough from the other guys that you continue to justify his playing time. You continue to justify his big role that he has. Now DeAndre is that guy. He's the big wing. And he's also better offensively. He's also a better, probably not as good of a defender. The numbers certainly say that he's not as good of a defender. But he does a lot of the stuff that Dean had to do for the previous version of the Cavs. And if you have a choice as a coach, DeAndre Hunter, Dean Wade, and you can only pick one of them based on certain kinds of lineups that you want to play and certain kind of matchups that you're looking for, you know, chances are 9 times out of 10, you're probably going DeAndre, right? So I'm going to continue to see what this particular edition of DeAndre Hunter means to Dean and how he's viewed and how important he is viewed by not just the coaching staff, but this organization as a whole.
Could mean a healthier Dean Wade too. If you're putting fewer miles on him, asking a little bit less of him physically. Yeah.
Less effort on the defensive end of the floor, less battling some of these guys that, you know, can take a toll on you physically. It's a good point.
Jimmy, what do you think about everything when it comes to these lineups? Like, I know we can.
What do I think about everything? Are we watching Interstellar as a class right now?
Man, no. I mean the lineups that Kenny Atkinson is going to get to utilize. I feel like we've called him multiple names on this podcast in a positive way, like a mad scientist, like. We called J.J. Redick a sicko because we know that as soon as Luka Doncic got traded, he's in the film room, like in his house, like in probably a dark room, just like maniacally laughing at the fact that he has Luka and LeBron James on the same team. I feel like Kenny Atkinson might have had a similar response to getting DeAndre Hunter because of the length, the size, the athleticism, the defensive versatility, the list goes on. How do you think this, not only this acquisition, but also Kenny Atkinson's mind and also coming off the All-Star game, getting to see how he can utilize different players and different things. Obviously, he wasn't running actions and stuff in the All-Star game, but just how that can help him in the situation with the Cavs.
Well, obviously, it helps to have more tools at your disposal, but we are getting to the point here where it's as much fun as Kenny's going to have experimenting over the next, 3 weeks or so and trying all these different things and, giving new lineups longer looks, empowering guys like Isaac and Dean as they come back. There is a time where it's time to contract. There is a time where it's time to pick the direction you're going to want to go in towards the playoffs. We've been sort of slowly starting to build toward, Kenny rolling out these different defensive playoff looks that they're going to want to try. Donovan's been talking about earlier in the season, I want to start playing playoff level minutes to get my conditioning ready for that sort of thing. I think that all makes sense. I don't think he's the only person that the Cavs feel that way about. So it's a tricky balance where we are kind of 2 months out from the playoffs here. And during the sprint to the finish, where you have, again, a good problem to have with all these different kinds of players they have defined places for, and that's fun to do to get in the lab, at a certain point, you need to, I guess, to continue the science analogy, record your results and pick a path forward, right? As much as Kenny likes to say, in the playoffs, eventually it looks like 8.5 men rotations, usually, particularly when you have, as the Cavs do, I mean, they got whoever the 8.5 end up being, 8.5 rock solid playoff rotation guys, all guys who will be deserving of every minute they receive. And there will end up being a player or two behind those 8.5 that deserve minutes too, but you got to draw the line somewhere and you got to do it at some point. So it's interesting to see what Kenny will do to suss out what he needs to suss out from all these different players. It's also interesting to see where he draws the line in the sand and says, okay, I think I've found my guys. These are the horses I'm going to ride in the playoffs. Now we want to focus on this specific rotation group of guys gelling in the best way they possibly can and preparing for the playoffs.
I think that's a great point, Jimmy. And Chris, I want to end the podcast with you and on this. Can you believe that there's only 28 games left? Like, Jimmy made a great point. Like, there are, really 3 to 5 weeks left. However you want to extrapolate that. In the season, 28 games. And this goes back to what we said on a recent podcast about how the All-Star break really doesn't feel like it's halfway through the season because there's a majority in the first half and it's not really the middle ground of the year, all these different things. But to be the beat reporter traveling with this team, be the beat reporter that's always with them, seeing them more than your family at most occasions, to know that there's 28 games left and to also know that for the playoffs to be right around the corner, what is that feeling like for you?
Well, it's a weird feeling, honestly, because I'm mentally prepared to work into June. It's the first time that I've felt that since 2018. And if we go back to last year, everybody knows this about me. I do my travel so far in advance, and I try and map things out as much as I possibly can. And I don't always get it right when it comes to the dates and stuff like that, but I have enough status with some of these hotel companies and some of these flights that I can book them in advance and kind of just rework when the flight takeoff is, or when the return flight home is, or when the check-in date is for these hotels. So last year, full transparency, I did not book a second round. I didn't. Because there was a legitimate debate in my own head about, are the Cavs even going to make it out of the first round? Is Orlando just going to be a really wonky matchup for them for a variety of reasons? And it was a war. It won 7 games, and then I had to scramble and kind of book Boston in the second round. Like, I am mentally prepared to book Oklahoma City, Denver, just in case, because I think there's a legitimate shot for this team. So that's the thing. You know, when it comes to this second half of the season, as the reporter, I'm not even paying attention to that many things from a win-loss result standpoint. They've shown so much already to me. And they have the recognition of so many other people around the NBA to this point. There are no more questions about them being good, them being legit. Those all have been answered. Now it's about like the process of figuring out the lineups and the rotations and stuff like that, and who's going to be part of that 8.5, and what does that look like, and is there another combination out there that Kenny's going to find similar to the Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley one, the Jared Allen, Darius Garland one, the one that he had with George Niang and Sam Merrill that he basically stumbled upon, and it became really, really lethal for them. You know, it's those kinds of things that I'm going to be paying more attention to in the home stretch. And that's different than last year. That's different than the year before, too. So it just feels different to me with this team for a variety of reasons. And like I said, when it comes to booking stuff, I'm ready to start thinking about those Western Conference teams that they could potentially face in the NBA Finals, because I don't know, what are there, 4 or 5 teams at this point that could legitimately win an NBA championship? I think that's probably right. And the Cavs are in that group. And that's a really, really good place to be. And it allows them a little bit of flexibility, and it allows them to kind of approach this final home stretch in a different kind of way than the way that they've approached it in the past.
I kind of called my shot like in the first quarter of the season. I don't even know if it was 10 games in, but I still think it's OKC Cleveland, man. I really do think that. And obviously our friend of the podcast, Brian Windhurst, has already said that he's booked his hotels for Cleveland for the NBA Finals. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting coming down the stretch.
It's Cavs, Celtics. I still think there's an argument for the Bucks. I do. I still think there is.
Denver.
You know, they're borderline top 10 in both offense and defense. They shoot the crap out of the ball. They have Giannis and Dame together. They're a different team, I think, when the playoffs come around. I think Kuzma is a really good addition for them. So those are the 3 in the East that I consider real, legitimate championship contenders. And then in the West, like, I don't think you can discount the Lakers. They have LeBron and Luka on the same freaking team. Are you kidding me? How do you discount that completely? And the Nuggets have gotten really, really good, and they're figuring a lot of things out, and they're finding different guys to make contributions toward the back end of their rotation. I'm not a believer in Memphis. I don't think they can operate and function the way that you need to consistently in a half-court setting. That's been a problem for them in playoffs past, and I still think it's a problem. I don't think they have the solution for it, even though Jaren Jackson Jr. is a different player, and he's elevated his game. So really, I think it's LA, Denver, OKC, Cleveland, Boston, and Milwaukee. I guess I could make an argument for 6, but like it's more 4 than it is 6. Like I'm kind of stretching it a little bit to get to the 6. Either way, you know, the Cavs are in that small grouping right there.
Jimmy, who you got?
So am I picking? Am I picking a group of teams? I'm confused.
Do what you want, man. Like, if you want to say who you think is going to be in the finals, who you think is going to win the finals, if you want to give Chris's top 6, top 5, I don't know.
I want to go to bed, so I think I'm just going to say I think the Celtics are going to win the East, and I think the Thunder are going to win the West. Sorry, I think the Nuggets are going to win the West. I'm sorry. Is it crazy for me to say that the defending champions are going to win the East? Is that got a reaction out of somebody? Sorry.
Absolutely not.
I still think they have another level to go. I think they're the best team in the league.
Crazy.
They were the best team in the league last year. The question for me will be, they kind of went unchallenged in the playoffs last year. The East was decimated by injuries and weird upsets as a result of those injuries. So we never really got to see them take a punch, and they have sort of approached the regular season with the nonchalance that typically comes with champions, and teams have shown in the past that they can turn it on. I don't like how much the Celtics play with their food, but I think that scare could come early enough. Maybe an early 2-1 series deficit in round 2 against the Knicks or something, who I know the Celtics have smacked around thoroughly during the regular season. But I just think that they will, by the time it's time to meet someone at their level, they will have found their stride in the playoffs, and they will be in the finals. And I think they'll be there against the Nuggets, because who's the second creator on the Thunder? I love Shea. He's awesome. Jalen Williams was not great in that Dallas series last year, and I want to see more.
I mean, to your point about Boston, the 3 games that they've played against the Cavs have had their attention. It is clear that they have raised their level against the Cavs. And they've raised it to a level to this point that the Cavs were unable to meet in 2 of those games. So I think when you want to look at what an engaged, locked-in Boston team that takes an opponent seriously, what that looks like, just look at those Cavs games.
And I don't think it was crazy for you to say, Jimmy. I think it was crazy for you to say that you wanted to go to bed and then had an entire different debate topic ready to go. But I won't pull that on you. We'll save that for a different day.
Sorry.
Attaboy. Can't ask for anything more from the Jimmy Watkins. You know what we're getting when we have him on the podcast. Anyway, with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can sign up for a 14-day free trial, or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page to sign up for $3.99 a month. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.